You enable a woman when you give her an education, and I really believe that an education is a fundamental right. It's not a privilege.
Among a group of women philanthropists who were looking to make transformative change for refugee women scholars. So women who are already philanthropically engaged, women who are already thinking about connecting their values to their giving and their leadership, and saw in UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, this incredible opportunity around education and making available these scholarships for refugee girls and young women, and hooked into it and said, this is where we're going to make a legacy and incredible impact that will give back for years to come. The Building Better Futures model is about investing in one refugee woman's education, right? It is true that there is a cost to that 4-year scholarship and the accommodations that come with it. But the truth is that is sort of like almost like the very beginning of the story. And so when I think of legacy, I think of the transformation that happens to that one refugee scholar's future, that happens when she makes a contribution to her household with, significantly more earnings as a university educated woman than without. The contribution that one refugee scholar makes then to her larger community beyond her household, and then of course to her country.
If you give a woman an education, there's magic that happens in her life. She has an incredible support system within herself. You enable a woman when you give her an education, and I really believe that an education is a fundamental right. It's not a privilege.
There's Monica from South Sudan. She was a scholar. She was nominated the president of the University of Nairobi Students Association. I think the first ever female refugee in that role. And that's because this scholarship program of UNHCR put her in that desk, put her in that student seat, and gave her what she called, and this is really powerful, gave her peace of mind, because it freed her from the pressures that would push her into early marriage or that would push her into informal economies, and allowed her to study and be an academic light.
I've met so many different kind of refugee girls who have really empowered themselves. And what I love the most about all of this is these girls, they want to go home. They want to go home, and through their education and through their higher education, is really, one member who I met was an incredible girl. She's South Sudanese. She fled to Kenya, and she has a law degree. And when I met her, which was 2 years ago, we held an evening reception here in New York, and I met her, and she was so unbelievably well-spoken, so educated, so proud. And and what she told me was like, I want to go home, and I would love to become leader of my country. So how can you not say that that's not, incredible? A woman who was able, through the most incredible hardships, was able to educate herself, was able to, take advantage of the Daffy Scholarship Program. The UN was able to give her, the UNHCR, the most unbelievable support and guide her, through her challenging times, but give her something where she's a whole different person through all of the hardships. And, and her dream is to go home and to be able to, to enable more women, which is incredible, and plus she has such a high goal for herself, which is wonderful.
We came to a few countries in the region, and we were welcomed so beautifully in Colombia, and we were bearing witness to the government and UNHCR's kind of partnership and collaboration to address what you just suggested is still a mass movement of people, and how I would say bold and at times quite courageous the government and its partners are trying to be in integrating and including those individuals in Colombia's success. So not only education, which of course we're talking about today, very focused, but also the ability for people to work and to be integrated into the economic productivity of the country for even a temporary period of time until maybe it's safe and appropriate for them to go back to their home country. That's what I think of when I hear Colombia mentioned in some of the real innovative work that your country has tried to advance in the face of the movement of a lot of people. Once you give anyone an education, it is really the only thing that can never be taken away from them. It rests in their head, in their brain, in their heart, in their sense of agency, and in their sense of purpose. So I know that in this moment of so much volatility in sort of public sector funding, what we can afford in education, what we can afford in health, how much we can afford to respond to humanitarian crises, I think we have to remember that education is the sort of best ROI, the best return on investment, the best long game we can play to give people a sense of agency that drives generational change, that drives economic independence among women and families. Making education available and accessible to them really can have life-changing consequences for a country and for sort of a national environment.
You give a woman an education and, so much happens for her there. A lot of these girls are, they're faced with early marriages. They're not allowed to be educated. So it's a difficult situation for them. And I always think we need to break the barriers and we need to kind of educate all of ourselves to really have this belief, this shared belief that everybody deserves, a great education.
No doubt you know this, that so many humanitarian crises, so many emergency circumstances are not resolved within a few weeks. So this is it's a protracted and long and sometimes very complicated journey for people. So I'm always, on the one hand, so grateful for emergency response, for donors and partners who were moved to stop the suffering right at sort of the point of disaster or catastrophe. But then my job is to tell a story of how that support, that one-off, in-the-moment support, has to then be turned into kind of ongoing and long-term support for education, for health, for resilience, for livelihoods. We have to make an emergency intervention for protection, for security, for safety, for basic health needs. And then we have to immediately look to the horizon and think about the ways we can sustainably support communities over time. I think good leadership is good leadership. It's good leadership at the dinner table, it's good leadership at the Fortune 50 company, and it's good leadership at the world stage. And for me, it's around a few things. One is communications, clarity and consistency in communications, telling people the shared journey that we're on, reminding them of the belief that you have in them. I think the second thing that really drives my leadership, and again, I hope it's relevant at all these levels, is this notion of curiosity. You can't ever think that you know the final answer to every question. You always have to remain with sort of an open channel to learning about today's issues and struggles through new lenses, through a new set of eyes, taking a new angle on it. And the last thing I would mention, and maybe this one sort of hits close to home for so many of us watching what's unfold on the world stage, is this notion of personal integrity, and to know that I lead literally by example, right? And that I hold myself accountable to the absolute highest standards of excellence, of truth. And I think if you lead in that way, it doesn't mean you're perfect, and it doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, for sure. But it does mean that you can always sort of go back to you did your own sort of personal best when it came to a measure of integrity. So I think those leadership lessons are maybe ones that I hope have some relevance for the different levels that you talked about that feel kind of so complex in today's environment.